Recession or depression? What's the difference? Recession is becoming a reoccurring topic on the news recently. There are good reasons why discussions on economic recession has become popular. Since 2020, the global financial markets have been on a decline. The United States has recorded the highest inflation rate it has ever seen in the past 40 years. The United Kingdom and Europe are also breaking negative economic records. It is no better in Asia, and the economic situation in Africa and South America are in shambles. So, are we in a recession? What exactly defines an economic recession? Most importantly, is there any difference between a recession and depression? Welcome to today's video. In this episode, we will take a critical look at what recession means and how different it is from a depression. Hopefully at the end of the video, you will have a better grasp of their differences and what to watch out for. The economy is dynamic. This means it is always changing. Either it is growing or it is shrinking. Experts look at the general direction of the trend over time to determine how long a growth period is or how long a decline period is. Each of this period is called a business cycle. The direction of the economy within the circle is what determines a progressive or recessive economy. Since 1854 till date, there have been 34 recessions and only one depression. What made this single depression different from the recessions that happened in this past 168 years? How different is the last recession in 2020 from the last depression that happened between 1929 and 1933? Recession defined. In simple terms, recession is a period or business circle in which the economy is on a downward trend. It is a sustained decline in economic growth and activities occurring simultaneously across key economic indicators such as GDP, household income, employment, industrial production, and consumer spending. Occasional growths or improvements within this period do not count if they cannot change the downward direction of the economy over a long time. This time is usually a minimum of 2 months, but the time frame varies from country to country. If you have been following the news, you will know that the economy has been spiraling down since March 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So why is the government yet to declare a recession? The answer is actually simple. The economic decline has been lopsided. Parameters such as inflation had risen exponentially, which is a clear signal of trouble in the economy. So also has GDP sunk. But fortunately, employment has not shifted as significantly. Corporate earnings are also growing, so the big businesses are actually making money, even though the economy is biting low-income earners. In a recessive economy, consumer spending should dwindle. We are yet to see that. Instead, consumer spending have remained strong, even increased, which is why corporate businesses are still doing well. It is also widely believed that 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth equates to a recession. But the White House has clarified that this is not an indicator they solely rely on. It can all be confusing for the average person. If economic hardship does not mean we are in a recession, and 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth does not constitute recession, then what exactly shows we are in one? This takes us to how the government declares a recession. How recessions are declared. In the United States, there is an organization tasked with the responsibility of making a recession official. That body is the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research. This body is also known as the Business Circle Dating Committee. This body relies on specific variables, such as actual personal income, which does not include social securities or government aids, industrial production index, IPI, employment, consumer spending, and the ISM PMI. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of gray areas to how low these indexes have to be to trigger a recession called by the NBER. But at this point, you should get the whole idea. The last NBER recession call was in 2020. So what happened then, and what made it a recession? Lessons for 2020 recession. In the first quarter, the US economy shrank by 5%. Entering the second quarter, it shrank again. This time by a mind-blowing 31.4%. This is a greater loss than even that of the Great Depression of the 1930s, when the economy lost 28%. By April 2020, 20.6 million people had lost their jobs. All non-essential businesses had shut down in 10 states. This was the worst recession the US ever experienced since the 1929 to 1933 Depression. The economy had never had such losses before. Despite losing so much, the NBER only called for a recession and not a depression. Examining these two cases would help us understand the differences better. Things went south, quickly and on a large scale, but the bounce back was also record-breaking. By the third quarter, the economy grew by 33.4%, then grew a further 4% to solidify its recovery. This was the shortest recession in US history. The 2020 recession lasted only 3 months, as against the 4 years it took the Depression to run its course. This is where we begin to understand the differences between the two. Perhaps if the 2020 recession had lasted much longer, it would have been classed a depression. If recessions are severe and taking a long time to solve, the economic pointers would deteriorate even further, leading to a proper depression. At this point, we must define what a depression is. What is an economic depression? An economic depression is simply a prolonged and severe economic recession. This would typically be for a period up to 3 years or more, in which the GDP of the affected economy continues in a prolonged decline of at least 10%. This decline would be evident in employment, local production, and slowed international trade. Inflation can make the cost of living unbearably high for people. But do you know that during a depression, inflation is never the problem? Instead, it is deflation. This is odd, right? Deflation occurs because there is simply too little money in circulation, so there is nothing for people to make purchases. Prices of commodities and services actually drop because there is no demand for these commodities and services. In the last depression, prices kept dropping by about 7% every year from 1930 to 1933. Low money supply usually leads to deflation, so you can add that in a depression, there is an acutely low money supply. Deflation can be bad for businesses too. Businesses could be cutting a lot of their profits just to stay alive. Transition of a recession to a depression. All depressions start as recessions. The only thing that does not make recessions become depressions is right economic and fiscal policies. The central bank must be able to study where the problem is coming from and respond appropriately. We saw this fast action in the 2020 recession. Businesses were closing, and this led to loss of jobs. The GDP had crashed and trade was practically dead. So what saved the situation? Increasing liquidity halted the recession because businesses were able to get credits they needed to reopen their businesses. The economy was up and running as soon as people had the chance to work. Employment went up, and within months of the 20.6 people that lost their jobs, only about 4 million were still unemployed. This was the mistake the US government made in 1929. Instead of encouraging productivity, the government started tightening. The Federal Reserve had raised rates, making credit unavailable to businesses. Because there was no money to do business, a lot of industries closed and people remained unemployed for a really long time. The economy was practically in a coma, as there was nothing to drive investments and productivity. Learning from the mistake of 1929, the US government had reduced interest rates to 0 in 2020, so people were able to take loans without fear of high interest. The government was practically dishing out money. There was a price to pay though. The national deficit skyrocketed from about 1 trillion to over 5.3 trillion. The biggest price at the end would be high inflation. In the end, the economy was saved from a depression, but people would have to spend more in purchases. If you enjoyed this video, then you would enjoy our next upload. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.